Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. We'll kick things off with the latest out of Syria, where the country is descending into its worst violence since the fall of former President Bashar al-Assad. With rebel factions fractured and Assad loyalists now fighting back, the chaos is building. We'll have the latest. Later in the show, a $53 billion Arab-backed plan to rebuild Gaza is now gaining European support, despite pushback from the U.S. and Israel. Plus, a South Korean court has ordered the release of impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol, setting the stage for his trial on rebellion charges. We'll have those details. And in today's back of the brief, this is an interesting story, a federal judge has ruled in favor of the U.S. state of Missouri in its $24 billion, that's billion with a B, lawsuit against China's Communist Party over COVID-19. That's a decision that the state attorneys general calls a landmark victory. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. As we've been reporting here on the PDB, Syria has been a powder keg since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and now, well, the fuse may have been lit. The interim government, led by former al-Qaeda member Ahmed al-Sharaa, was supposed to restore order, but instead, the country is now spiraling into its worst violence since Assad's fall. Rebel factions remain fractured, and efforts to unify them into a national army have failed. Fighting has exploded across Syria in recent days, with heavy clashes between security forces and Assad loyalists in the coastal cities of Latakia and Tartus. Much of the violence is concentrated in Alawite strongholds, areas fiercely loyal to Assad, who himself came from the Alawite sect. The death toll is alarming. Hundreds of civilians have been killed since Thursday, along with at least 150 security personnel. Government forces say another 300 have been captured. Eyewitnesses describe execution-style killings, and reports indicate hospitals have been attacked. Syria's transitional government is scrambling to regain control, forming an emergency committee to investigate human rights violations and vowing to hold security forces accountable for excessive force. But so far, well, those promises aren't slowing the bloodshed. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reports at least 745 civilians have been killed in 30 massacres targeting Alawites along the west coast. And while the government insists it's cracking down, its own forces have been accused of carrying out some of the worst atrocities. Now, many Alawites voluntarily disarmed after Assad's fall, but not all. Those who stayed armed are now locked in brutal clashes with security forces, making it unclear who's actually in control. The head of Syrian intelligence is blaming former regime military and security officials for orchestrating the attacks. Meanwhile, the government is striking back hard, launching operations against pro-Assad fighters in Assad's hometown and the surrounding area. Reports indicate that entire neighborhoods are turning into war zones. Authorities in Tartus have imposed a curfew, urging civilians to avoid conflict zones. Social media videos show intense firefights, bodies in the streets, and military reinforcements pouring into the hardest-hit areas. Some footage even captures clashes near the Russian airbase in Latakia, raising concerns of broader consequences beyond Syria's borders. Regional powers have offered comments on the renewed violence. Saudi Arabia, which has come out in support of the new government, has condemned the bloodshed, blaming outlaw groups for the attacks. Meanwhile, Iran, one of Assad's key allies, of course, has expressed concern over the violence. Really? The number one state sponsor of terrorism on the planet is expressing concern over violence. It's almost like the mullahs and the IRGC don't have a sense of irony. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman condemned the bloodshed. He also warned that the chaos could be exploited by outside forces, particularly Israel. Yep, no sense of irony. For his part, interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa is downplaying the chaos. Speaking from a mosque in Damascus on Sunday, he called the crisis one of the, quote, expected challenges that Syria would face. He added, "We must preserve national unity and civil peace as much as possible, and we will be able to live together in this country," end quote. But right now, the unity is, well, nowhere to be found. With Assad loyalists, rival factions, and government forces battling for control, Syria's future looks increasingly unstable. All right, coming up next. Europe backs a $53 billion plan to rebuild Gaza despite U.S. and Israeli pushback. And South Korea's impeached president is released ahead of his trial. I'll be right back. This podcast is brought to you in part by Stash. Saving and investing can feel impossible, but with Stash, well, it's not only possible, it's easy. Stash isn't just an investing app. It's a registered investment advisor that combines automated investing with dependable financial strategies to help you reach your goals faster. They'll provide you with personalized advice on what to invest in based on your goals. Or if you just want to sit back and watch your money go to work, you can opt into their award-winning, expert-managed portfolio that picks stocks for you. Stash has helped millions of Americans reach their financial goals, and it starts at just $3 per month. Don't let your savings just sit around. Make that money work for you. Go to get.stash.com/PDB to see how you can receive $25 towards your first stock purchase and a few important disclosures. That's get.stash.com/PDB. Now, this is a paid non-client endorsement, not representative of all clients, and not a guarantee. Investment advisory services offered by Stash Investments, LLC. That's an SEC-registered investment advisor. And, of course, investing involves risk. And as they say, the offer is subject to terms and conditions. Welcome back to the PDB. Despite the United States and Israel's rejection, the Arab-backed Gaza Reconstruction plan is gaining momentum among key European allies, including France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Unveiled last week at an Arab summit in Cairo, the $53 billion proposal has been described by European foreign ministers as a, quote, realistic path to rebuilding Gaza, while reiterating Hamas must neither govern the enclave nor pose a threat to Israel in the future. In a joint statement, the ministers emphasized that the Palestinian Authority, known as the PA, should play a, quote, central role in managing a post-war Gaza within a, quote, solid political and security framework, end quote. The Arab-backed plan envisions a 6-month transitional period in which an independent committee of technocrats governs before handing power to a retrained PA. Now, there's no real details yet on exactly who will be responsible for retraining the Palestinian Authority. And conspicuously absent from the document is any clear strategy for neutralizing Hamas, instead suggesting that terror groups should be addressed through a broader political process aimed at statehood. That sounds certainly doable. That omission was seized upon by Israeli officials, who reaffirmed their staunch opposition to any framework that does not explicitly eliminate Hamas from the enclave. Israeli leadership has made it clear a two-state solution is not on the table. The Egyptian-led initiative has been framed as a counterpoint to the vision put forth by President Trump, who last month floated the idea of resettling Palestinians outside Gaza, 2.3 million of them, and transforming the enclave into what he called the, quote, Riviera of the Middle East under U.S. ownership. That proposal, here's a surprise, was roundly rejected by Egypt, Jordan, and other regional players, who cited national security risks and a refusal to endorse forced displacement. And as we've discussed in the past on the PDB, Egypt, Jordan, and the other Arab states have a total of, zero interest in taking in the approximately 2.3 million residents of Gaza. The U.S. and Israel firmly rejected, though, the Arab-backed plan. An Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman dismissed it as outdated, saying it fails to reflect the realities of the war following the 7 October 2023 terror attacks orchestrated by the Iranian-backed Hamas. The spokesman further condemned its reliance on what he characterized as corrupt and ineffective institutions such as the PA and the UN's refugee agency, UNRWA, which he accused of complicity in terrorism. Meanwhile, American officials have cast doubt on the feasibility of any immediate reconstruction. National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes argued that given the sheer scale of destruction, the notion of rebuilding remains premature until Gaza is cleared of debris and unexploded ordnance. But not everyone in Trump's orbit is dismissing the Arab plan outright. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, called the proposal a, quote, good faith first step. Still, he was quick to emphasize that it does not align with Trump's non-negotiable demand for a Hamas-free Gaza. With divisions widening between the U.S., Israel, and European allies, the question remains, can a unified vision for post-war Gaza emerge, or will competing agendas consign the enclave to indefinite limbo? Well, history would seem to indicate that limbo is the likely result. Okay, shifting to South Korea's ongoing political crisis. A court on Friday ordered the release of impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol from jail. The ruling raises the possibility that Yoon could stand trial for rebellion without being physically detained. As our regular PDB listeners will recall, Yoon was arrested and indicted in January after declaring martial law on 3 December in a move that briefly deployed troops and police to the National Assembly. Yoon's decree sparked immediate backlash, with liberal opposition lawmakers forcing their way into the Assembly Hall, nullifying it unanimously within hours. Days later, the opposition-controlled parliament moved to impeach him, suspending him from office. The Seoul Central District Court ruled Friday that Yoon's legal detention period had expired before his indictment, leading to his release. The court also raised concerns over the legality of the investigation, with Yoon's defense team arguing that the agency behind his arrest lacked the authority to probe charges of rebellion. That said, South Korean law allows prosecutors to temporarily hold a suspect while pursuing an appeal, and that's a step that the opposition Democratic Party is now pushing for. Meanwhile, the Constitutional Court, which concluded impeachment hearings in late February, is expected to issue a ruling soon on whether to formally remove Yoon from office or reinstate him. Should the court uphold his impeachment, Yoon would be officially ousted, triggering a new presidential election within 2 months. If the court rejects the impeachment, but he remains entangled in legal proceedings, the question remains how, or even if, he could resume his presidential powers. Complicating matters further, as if they needed even more complication, a conviction on rebellion charges carries a sentence of life in prison or even the death penalty. While sitting presidents generally enjoy immunity from prosecution, South Korean law makes an exception for crimes like treason and rebellion, opening the door for legal action. Yoon's defense team welcomed the expired detention period ruling, calling for his immediate release, while his presidential office expressed hope that he could return to work soon. But the decision has only deepened the country's already bitter political divide. Supporters argue that Yoon's martial law decree was necessary to counteract legislative paralysis, while critics see it as an authoritarian overreach reminiscent of past military rule in the country. Further fueling tensions, top military and police officials recently testified that Yoon ordered security forces to obstruct a parliamentary vote and even detain opposition lawmakers. Yoon, for his part, insists that his deployment of troops was not meant to suppress democratic processes, but rather to expose what he calls obstructionist tactics by the Democratic Party. As large-scale rallies by opponents and supporters of Yoon erupt across the country, the Constitutional Court's impending decision carries enormous stakes. All right, coming up in the back of the brief, the U.S. state of Missouri wins a major lawsuit against China over COVID-19. I'll be right back. In today's back of the brief, Missouri has won a major legal battle against China, with a federal judge ruling in favor of the state's massive $24 billion lawsuit against the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Now you just have to collect those funds from the CCP. There's the rub. The case accuses Beijing of hoarding protective medical supplies during the pandemic. That ruling, handed down Friday, marks the largest judgment in Missouri's history. The lawsuit, originally filed in 2020 by then-Attorney General Eric Schmidt, alleged that China obstructed the production, purchase, and export of medical supplies, including personal protective equipment, causing untold suffering and economic devastation. Initially dismissed by a lower court, the case was revived in January after an appeals court allowed Missouri to move forward with claims related to supply hoarding. Judge Stephen Limbaugh ruled that Missouri provided enough evidence to establish liability, delivering the massive $24 billion judgment against multiple Chinese entities, including the People's Republic of China, the National Health Commission, the Ministry of Emergency Management, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey celebrated the ruling, stating, quote, "This is a landmark victory for Missouri and the U.S. in the fight to hold China accountable for unleashing COVID-19 on the world," end quote. On social media, Bailey's rhetoric took a more taunting tone, posting, quote, "Hey, China, you owe Missouri $24 billion. Pay up, or we start seizing assets and farmland." His comments were a pointed reference to the more than 42,000 acres of Missouri farmland owned by Chinese entities as of August 2024, and that's been a long-standing source of concern among lawmakers. Predictably, China dismissed the ruling outright. Well, that's shocking. The Chinese embassy, in a statement to the New York Times, said Beijing would, quote, "not recognize the judgment," and warned that Beijing would, quote, "firmly take reciprocal countermeasures according to international law if its interests were affected." Despite the legal victory, Missouri's ability to collect the $24 billion, that remains improbable. China is almost certain to ignore the ruling entirely. But Bailey's threats of farmland seizures actually could set the stage for a broader standoff, especially as tensions between Washington and Beijing remain high over trade disputes and espionage concerns and national security threats. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, 10 March. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And if you didn't have a chance over the weekend to catch our latest episode of the PDB Situation Report, well, don't fret. It and past episodes are waiting for you on our YouTube channel, at President's Daily Brief, and also, of course, on podcast platforms where you get your podcast stuff. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.